And with Terry here, I can lock the meeting, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna lock us in. And it's setting up the live, so we should be up in about 30 seconds.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Good song.
let me just verify that it went up right. Christopher, can you check on yours?
Yeah. So, Ian, you're about to become YouTube famous. Just a warning.
Oh, I am. I wasn't aware.
No way around it.
Oh yeah, Christopher's here, wants you to know there's a face melter for you on the way.
I'm waiting for the face melters, Chris. I missed those.
A virtual face melter.
Yeah, we'll have to do virtual face melters. I'll have to see if I can get one around here.
I'm on, you guys. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, Terry.
Is my picture on?
No.
No, I'll prompt you real quick to ask to start video. All right, I think it just sent you a prompt, Terry, to get started. I just I'm gonna just make sure we're up on the public side. It should be up. I'm gonna check on it. Is it up for you? It's maybe my cache is not clear or something.
There you go, Terry. We can see you now.
All right, Christopher shared we are live. I just want to confirm on my browser. Yes, we are good to go. We are live.
Okay, good. Turn my volume here. All right, can you hear me okay? All right, good. So this is a standing committee and we operate by rules, public engagement here. So I'll go through the standard practice, and that would be, I'd like to call the meeting to order here at 2:04 p.m. And I'll do a quick roll call. Terry Andrews here. Trustee Clark?
Here.
Okay. And I presume, Nikki or Nicole, that there are no questions that have been sent in?
I don't have any questions. I did receive one public comment from Mark Mariscal, and I think he intended me to share it at this meeting, possibly at the board meeting on Monday, but I'll go ahead and share it now if nobody minds.
Sure.
It's a message from the Rotary about a program they're doing called Feed a Local Family. So the Rotary Club of Altadena invites anyone and everyone to consider nominating a local Altadena family for a restaurant prepared meal from El Patron. One family a day through June 3rd will be selected to receive up to 5 items from the menu. To nominate a family who has been financially impacted due to COVID-19, please go to El Patron's restaurant and fill out the form. If you wish to contribute money towards the fund to extend it past June 3rd, please visit the Rotary website, altadenarotary.com. And towards the bottom of the page is a link to make a tax-deductible contribution.
Good. Thank you, Mark, wherever you are. So with that, Nicole and Nikki, I'll turn it back over to you to introduce speakers, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, great. So today from, not Platinum Consulting anymore, I'm so sorry, from I Bailey, we
Okay.
have Cindy Byram
Yeah.
and Ian Berg here to help us present the budget. So I have a few documents and I was going to share my screen if that works for everybody.
Yes.
That's great.
Let me allow it. Let me allow it real quick.
Okay.
And just to confirm, we are locked, so everyone is aware we're locked. And so I'm going to allow you to share your screen as well.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, it's not letting me do it because I've never done it before. It wants me to quit Zoom in order to make it happen.
What page are you wanting, Nicole? I could probably pull it up.
I was just gonna do the draft budget.
Okay, that's in our board package, right?
Ian, you could probably pull it up too,
Yeah, I
right?
actually have it up right now. If you just want to allow me to share my screen, I could go through it.
Do you mind, Chloe?
Yeah, no, if I allow one person to share, everyone in the meeting can share.
Okay, let me just get this up here. Let me see. Okay, I think this is the the right one.
Yes, perfect.
But yeah, just let me know when you want to pull up something different, Nicole, and we can do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so this is the draft budget for next year that Nikki and I have prepared with Cindy and Ian. And it's laid out like our usual budget is, starting with the revenue and then going down to expenses further down. So I was just gonna go line by line, if that's okay with everybody, or I can do just a brief overview. And if you guys have questions, I can do it that way.
If it's okay with you, Nicole, could you do a quick overview and then we'll go through line items? I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
And
Okay.
Nicole, can I ask for just one more kind of baseline snapshot? You said that Cindy and Ian had put the budget together with you. And Nikki, I'm assuming that there was a lot of shopping and talking that you did with all the department heads. Could you just kind of take us through the entire budget process, how you came up with the numbers and stuff? Just real quickly.
Yeah, definitely. So we do get feedback from all the department heads. A couple months before we put the budget together, we send out an email to everybody asking them to let us know what their anticipated needs will be for the next fiscal year. And I do that really with anybody who maintains a budget. So Jonathan submits numbers for all the facilities expenses and some capital projects. Christopher does the same thing for all the IT and some capital. All the library managers submit their budgets. Stella and Carlene work together to do collections. And for the basic things like utilities and operating expenses, I tend to do those budgets. Salaries and wages, I put together a huge spreadsheet of all the anticipated salaries, and then Ian kind of finesses that for me. For the income accounts, we reach out to the friends in the foundation to see, what their anticipated donations will be for the year. And then same with our other income, I kind of just base that on what we did the previous year for things like fines and fees and passport revenue, things like that. And then for the property tax income, I'll talk more about it later. We usually do anticipate for a 2% increase every year. This year we're not anticipating that. But yeah, we kind of just put everything together, and then Cindy and Ian take one final look at it and present us with this draft document.
Okay, thanks so much for that overview.
Sure.
And can I say something too?
Mhm.
And then the step between us, reaching out and gathering all the information, Nicole and I met and went through line by line to discuss, agree or disagree with, some of the recommendations by the managers specifically. And I have to say, I think this year was, and it's my first year, so again, speaking from no experience at all, but I do think this year was weird because the numbers don't reflect what a regular year of expense would look like because of this last quarter being very wonky. So some of it is a little bit of guesswork would be the best way I could put it. If I would think Nicole would agree.
Yes. Okay. So if we want to just start at the top with revenues, so under donations and grants, I'll let Ian speak more to the reserves number, that line
If
too.
you want, Nicole, I'll just do a quick overview of that line number 2
That would
right
be
now.
Mhm.
So this year, you might notice this is placed in a different position than it was last year, but this top line will outline your drawdown or your addition to reserves to present sort of a balanced budget. So this would be insinuating that this budget would draw down 161,000 of your reserves as it stands now in the 2021 column. So just to note how that line's working there.
And we can
If anybody
speak
has
to
any
why.
questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can speak to why as we go
Okay.
through.
Definitely. Okay, so if we move towards donations and grants, so like I said, we reached out to the foundation and the Friends to see what their anticipated donations would be for next fiscal year. And unfortunately, with the Friends missing out on some of their big sales due to the closure, they're anticipating a little less for next fiscal year. The literacy services grant is always the same amount, so we left that kind of the same. Fines and fees, we did bump up the printing revenue. We were doing really well for printing revenue last year, and hopefully that continues when we reopen. Passport services, we did drop down a little bit due to an anticipated loss in their revenue since we haven't been open and since we might have fewer people coming in, fewer people traveling next year due to the corona fear. Sales of products stays the same. And then when we go down to, let's see, county interest and savings, those tend to stay the same year to year. And then under miscellaneous income, nothing budgeted there. Film rental revenue, unfortunately, we didn't do as well this year. They do tend to rent our lot right now, actually, usually like April, May, June is when they do the bulk of their filming. And unfortunately, we missed out on a lot of that this year. So hopefully next year, the film crews will need our parking lot again. E-rate revenue, we kept that the same. It has been going down year to year, but not by much, maybe only a few hundred to $1,000 a year we get income from E-rate revenue. Credit card rebates, we do use our credit cards as much as possible because we do get those statement credits. So we budgeted another $10,000 for next year. And then property taxes, I can let Ian speak a little more to this. I know we tried not to account for too great an increase for property taxes for next fiscal year, anticipating some losses due to COVID-19.
Sure, and in general here on the property taxes, what we're anticipating for next year is really what the county allocated for this year. So really a 0% increase, and you notice a little bit of a difference because we did receive a little bit more this year than we budgeted for last year. And on certain lines like 28 and 29, conservatively, we're budgeting those at zeros, as those can be refunds or reallocations. They can go positive or negative. We don't really know what to expect on those. And then,
sorry, in line
yeah,
26,
go ahead.
then, does that number that you've got in the 2021 column, that reflects actual, right?
Right,
So
yeah, we actually budgeted that one pretty dead on.
1920 actual. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Thanks.
And then you have your special assessment down there, which we never budget for an increase. And that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later on if we get to the projections here. But overall, pretty similar. We're not budgeting any increases in property taxes to be conservative.
All right, so we can move to expenses.
Sorry, just one quick thing before we move on. I just want to make sure that I've got this straight. Pretty much then the only things that will have any movement in them, I mean, obviously who knows what will happen with property taxes, right? Like
Right.
we may see an increase, we may not. I think it's very smart to budget for a flat. But really the only thing that has movement in it is how much we pull out of reserves and how much we make on passports. And that's pretty much it. Right?
Yeah, if
Not
we talk big
anything.
picture, property taxes are pretty static. And we're just being conservative with those passports because of the coronavirus, and people are probably not going to be coming in to get them because I'm sure not many people are going to be traveling in the coming months.
Totally reasonable. And I'm just looking for anything that might fluctuate up or down in the revenue category. And it seems like, I mean, obviously reserves, we decide how much we want to, draw on that. But okay, perfect. So everything else is pretty locked down. There's not going to be a lot of movement one way or the other. Okay.
Yeah, and it brings us to another one of our points that we might discuss later. Is, property taxes are the bulk of the district's revenues here.
Yeah.
So
we do not have a diverse revenue stream. Great. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see. So we start with salaries and wages, and we did bump up salaried a little bit. You'll notice we didn't have a director position being paid salaried for the majority of this fiscal year, since Nikki came on a little bit later. So that number did increase, anticipating that full-time person for next fiscal year. Let's see. And then if we go down to insurance, Most of those figures stay the same. We did get a slight decrease from the retiree health insurance payment, but otherwise, most of our rates stayed the same. Life insurance was the only one that increased just a little bit from last year. And then PEPRA also increased. Again, that's due to having a director now on staff. That number increased. And then PERS unfunded, of course, that increases every year. So we're looking at a 13% increase for next fiscal year. Our OPEC contribution, that is the figure that the actuaries gave us. That's the minimum that we're able to contribute while maintaining our discount rate. So that's to pre-fund our post-employment benefit fund. So we do contribute to that every year. And that 60,000 is what the actuaries have recommended that we contribute. Any questions about salaries or anything before we move on to operating expenses?
Nikki, you had mentioned to me that we were looking at changing the way we handle OPEB, right?
Yes.
Okay, is that reflected here or is that something we need to talk about?
It's not reflected here, and I don't know if we want to wait and discuss the projections and potentially some of the things that we might want to adjust or remove at that point.
Yeah, if it's not showing up here, let's wait and we'll go through everything that's laid out. I just want to make sure that I'm remembering what we've talked about and I'm not
We
forgetting.
did. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, so if we scroll down a little bit towards operating expenses, thank you.
Nicole, I'm sorry to bust in on you, but one more question about salaries and wages. And how much have we budgeted for cost of living increases and so on next year? Is that all accounted for in these numbers, or would we expect to expend more than this on salaries once and if we raise wages for people?
Answer your question, Terry. We did a 2%, right, Nicole? That's what I had in here.
Okay. So 2%, that 2% is the COLA.
It is included. Yeah, and
Okay.
that's why you'll see the increase on the hourly here. This is the 2%. And this is obviously more, as Nicole discussed, having a full year of Nikki.
Okay, good.
Oh, sorry. Does the hourly number reflect the bump in the minimum wage at the lowest step that we had looked at in the class and comp numbers, or not yet?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so it's the same as it is now.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And we did include a 2%. Whether or not we think we're going to offer the COLA is still a discussion point, because we are going through the class and comp study right now as well. And we're looking at how we're going to bump up some of the staff through the recommendations in that study. We don't have final numbers yet though. So I think we're going to have to look at that as a bigger picture, and we'll definitely know more and be able to finalize the numbers by the time we approve the budget in June.
Yeah. That's great.
That was, Nikki, that was part of my question, I guess, and that would be when we talk to the board about this at the next meeting, I think it's probably important to set expectations that number might go up, that's got a little volatility to it, just so people aren't caught by surprise later on.
Right. Yeah, until we get the final numbers from the class and comp study or the compensation side of it, that number could change for sure.
Nikki, when do you guys anticipate having the study done? When will it be finished?
We're actually meeting with Coffin Associates on Thursday to finalize the draft of all the classification part of it. But then we're also going to have a conversation with them about, because quite honestly, there were several positions that are quite underpaid. So I think if we have an ability to spend on salaries and wages this year, it's going to be to get those people up to the right level. I'm hoping, I don't know, in the next week or two, Nicole, would you say?
Yeah.
Because we're looking to their expertise in terms of how we could phase that in. Because I think it's going to be much too large of a number for us to just do at once.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're ready, we can go down to operating expenses. Let's see.
Hang on 1 second, Nicole. There's, now that I'm looking at this again, there's one more thing I want to bring up.
Okay.
CalPERS website was down when I put this together. And
Oh.
so this 167,000 for the PERS unfunded, I used last year's valuation.
Mhm.
So I actually do believe that this will increase a little bit, just so we all keep that in mind. But I have to go onto their website. I noticed it was up as I checked for another client just yesterday. So I have to review that and just double check on this number.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ian, which line was that?
That's the PERS unfunded line 54 right here.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's see. So first up, we have recruitment at line 61. And we did increase that line, anticipating that we might want to implement more testing of potential employees through like live scan and physical exams and things like that. We did budget for that, anticipating that we might want to do that going forward. And then the advertising budget stays the same as last year. Same with everything under fees, banking, payroll, and county tax all stay the same. The insurance, line 70 for property and liability, that 50,000 figure came from SDRMA. So that is what they are anticipating for us for next fiscal year as far as expenses. Earthquake insurance, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a quote from them before this meeting. She should have one for me by the end of this month. I'm hoping it doesn't increase much more than that, but it is possible that it'll be more than it was last year. And then trustee professional development, we did add a little more to that, anticipating some type of board retreat after the elections. Training and education, we budgeted the same. We are hoping to be able to send people to CLA as soon as it is rescheduled. And then staff recognition, we did drop a little bit. We don't have as many significant milestones coming up this year as we did last year. Last year, we had many significant milestones for staff. And then meetings and travel, we upped just a little bit based on spending for this fiscal year. Mileage and parking stays the same. And then we go down to utilities. We were a little bit under budget for this fiscal year for electricity, so we dropped that a bit. Same with gas, water and refuse stay the same. Membership dues and subscriptions, we were a little bit underspent this year, so we dropped that one a little bit. Same with postage. Otherwise, everything stays the same except for equipment lease. That one went down quite a bit too. Audit and financial consulting, we dropped just a little bit. And then legal fees, we were able to drop quite a bit, which was nice. Architectural and engineering, you know, we talked a little bit with the facilities committee, so that figure might change too, depending on what architectural work we decide we want to have done next fiscal year. Collection agency, we're able to eliminate that line now that we're no longer doing collections. And then for consultants other, we only budgeted the 30,000, not realizing how much the consulting work would cost to fund a potential bond measure. So that number will definitely need to be adjusted if we do decide to move forward with that for this fiscal year. Any questions so far about any of those?
I have one quick question, Nicole, and that would be on consultants in this section. Will we have paid up all of our current bills by the time the next budget kicks in? You know, the ARG bills and all the projects that we've had over the last year, will they all be squared up by the time this budget launches?
They will. They do.
Okay.
Actually, most of them are already paid up.
Okay.
What's involved in equipment lease and rental? What are we leasing or renting that we're saving some money on?
That's a good question. So that applies to things like our multifunction machines, the copiers and printers that we have in both buildings. We do pay a lease fee for all of those. And due to some restructuring every year that we do end up saving some money on those depending on the lease agreements that we have.
Okay.
I can't think of
I think Christopher mentioned to me that we are leasing some printers and he's gonna eliminate that. He's just gonna purchase and maintain them himself.
Mhm.
So I think that's where probably a lot of that savings is coming from.
That's great. That's terrific. I was just wondering like what I was trying to figure out what we're renting for 20 grand a year that we shouldn't just buy.
It's expensive, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And
it's
I'm sure
mainly-
it's totally valid. It's interesting.
yeah, I think it's mainly also because it includes, like with the copiers, it includes maintenance and supplies.
Mhm.
Oh, interesting.
It does
Okay.
include your printing as well, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and trust me, he keeps an eye on every penny that is spent for equipment and technology, so.
Believe that completely.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, so if we go down to the information technology section, so all of these figures were submitted by Christopher, and he does have some items that he's looking to purchase for next fiscal year and some consulting that we'll need to do. We did up the telecommunications budget due to the purchase of district cell phones for salaried staff. He is looking to purchase some equipment. Some of those printers were mentioned. Not as much on website development now that the website is mostly done and fully developed. I don't think it needs any more work. Chloe has done a fantastic job on it. And then we move down to materials, which
Hang on one second. What's the consulting budget for?
some of it, I think some of it is related to E-rate. I think Christopher might be sitting there. Is Christopher there, Chloe?
He is here.
That's for a large E-rate.
Can't really hear you, Christopher.
Sorry, he's has
All right.
something in his mouth.
Yeah, that's for E-rate, and it's in 5-year cycle. And so the 5-year cycle is ended, so we're gonna have access to like our maximum allotment. And yeah, so that consulting would be for the E-rate consultant. pretty much. And
Got it. So basically it's a cost to get that E-rate number bumped up to where it is.
Mhm.
Right. And,
Yeah.
And then, so that project will be pretty large, and anticipate having some like, instead of saw cutting on the floor, it would be like maybe some thread put in. There'll be some changing out of old Cat 5 lines to Cat 6. And then some switches and other infrastructure that will be bumped up as well to go in
Okay.
on a 10 gigabit upgrade.
Dope. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. So then we can move down to materials. And I think I mentioned that Carlene and Stella worked on this. So we did do a couple of cuts to audio CDs. Unfortunately, people just aren't checking those out as much. You know, most people just don't really have CD players a lot anymore, especially not in their cars. So we're not anticipating buying as many of those. We are upping our DVD purchases. DVDs are especially popular over at the branch. And then processing, we eliminated that line because of a restructuring with Baker and Taylor. They now include processing in the materials cost itself, so we no longer have to separate that out. Periodicals, we're also anticipating a slight decrease. I believe we weeded out a good amount of magazines, and we're anticipating possibly not spending as much on periodicals, the things that change hands multiple times day to day, in anticipation of social distancing measures. And then downloadables, we did up that number considerably to purchase more e-content and more titles on things like Hoopla. And then the library of things, we did decrease that a little bit. Again, I think in anticipation of things not changing hands quite as often, maybe.
Can I go back to periodicals for a second?
Mhm.
I mean, is it realistic for us to be doing this in any kind of scale at all? I mean, are we going to be able to circulate them effectively by the time they're still in date, or are we just going to have a bunch of stuff piling up that nobody can use because it's been touched by one person?
Well, what we talked about was not having them out in the building for people to like use and put back all day, but you would have to check it out and take it home. And then when it's returned, it gets quarantined with the other materials.
Right.
We had already been looking at eliminating some of them based on circulation numbers anyway. And we're also exploring getting digital, you know, expanding our Flipster content and having access to more online newspapers in light of everything that's going on. So that number could dramatically decrease as well.
Yeah, I guess.
I'm not sure if, Nicole, do we pay for Flipster out of the periodicals number, or is that a downloadable?
I believe it's a downloadable.
So potentially, Katie, we could shift more money into the downloadables because obviously that's what everybody's using right now.
I guess I just worry about spending, you know, not that I think we shouldn't have periodicals, but just like the number of items per user and how low that ratio is going to have to be with a checkout time and a recovery time for things that are weekly or monthly. Like, how much utility are we really going to get from that?
Right.
This is something that, you know, if we could have something similarly priced that 5 or 10 people can use at once, I feel like there's so much better value for money. And that's not a forever thing, but at least, you know, for a while.
Yeah. And I do want to say that is something we're talking about and looking into right now.
Okay.
The other thing I did want to point out is in eliminating the processing of materials, we allocated that money into some of those budgets. So for example, books, it's 130. That's taking into account some of that processing fee because it shows an even line, but it's actually a reduction in the budget because we're taking into account some of that processing. That's why the DVDs and video games is higher as well. Because overall, like our strategy with collections, I think especially moving into this fiscal year is not as much physical overall. Because who knows what is going to happen in the next year and how confident they are going to be in physical materials moving forward.
One thing I did want to ask, and not to get too granular into, you know, materials and collections and stuff, but just I'm wondering about our current number of mobile hotspots and if we might want to increase that more than we normally would, given the issues with connection and the reality that we may not be able to have people in the building, you know, in any kind of quantities. And I'm wondering if that is reflected somewhere in this budget or no.
That would be a good question for Christopher. I do know that I've had conversations with Claire Newman from the Friends about some of their money potentially going towards more mobile hotspots.
Okay.
Because if we, you know, a lot of what we spend on with that budget is programming. And if we can't offer programming, you know.
Yeah.
So that's something that her and I talked about, but I don't know that Christopher has designated funds for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually going along with what Nikki was saying in terms of relying on the Friends to pay for additional mobile hotspots. Funny thing is, right now those types of hotspots are actually they've gone back order. So is the demand. So we'll see if that continues, if we'll even be able to get access to them. Otherwise, we might have to look at different mobile hotspot solutions. But currently, our ranks are around 27 mobile hotspots. But yeah, there's a little bit of flexibility in the 7185 budget where mobile hotspots could slip in like an extra rank of 10 of them.
Yeah, I ask because it's one of the things that I consistently get questions about, either in person or, you know, online. People want to know basically, how can I get internet and how can I get internet at home? And I think that's going to continue to be a huge demand.
Definitely noted. So we'll have Christopher keep an eye on it, Katie, especially if we're not able to order them right now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I was sure you guys had thought about it. I just wanted to know where to look.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we can move down to facilities, grounds and maintenance. Let's see, so maintenance contracts, that's line 128. That includes things like our elevator contract is under that, as well as things like Dewey Pest, any building contracts that we have. And that did decrease just a little bit. Building maintenance and repairs stays about the same with landscaping. Jonathan is anticipating doing, I believe, some major tree work next fiscal year. So that's why that landscaping budget is where it is. And then for programming, we did make a few cuts, just anticipating that we won't be able to offer as much going into next fiscal year, probably at least throughout the summer, possibly into the fall. And then summer reading did increase a little bit based on their inability to spend for this summer. We're hopeful that by next summer, they'll be able to make up a little bit of that. And then for trustee election, we did budget $70,000, which may be high. I don't know. It depends on the participation and the turnout and how much work the county has to do, counting the ballots and all that. So there's every chance that number could go down. The last time we had an election, it was 88,000, but we did have a lot of participation in that election.
Well, and now that we've got, it'll be interesting to see how the county calculates it, given that everybody will have a mail-in ballot this year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be, especially they've got the new polling system. Like it's going to be totally a crapshoot to see what that number comes back as.
Yeah. Okay, so capital. There were some requests in here for, let's see, for equipment and furniture. We have a DVD lending library for over at the branch, and some upgrades to the HVAC system in the community room. And then for structures and improvements, we have, Christopher already mentioned some of the E-rate projects that he's hoping to complete, as well as some more work at the branch, like resurfacing the parking lot and replacing some of the windows at that location. So that's what makes up those two lines. And then you'll see that figure that Ian had mentioned earlier, that drawdown from reserves. And that's primarily, obviously, things like the election and the capital expenses that put us at that figure.
Nicole, I've got a question that goes kind of threads through this whole thing, but starts right at the very beginning of the report under revenues. We got the drawdown, and Ian did a good job of explaining all that and so on. But in my research for this, I went back a few years and found a couple of notations where reserves were broken out, and they were showing what the operating revenue for 6 months would be. It had a government code that governed that and so on. And then it had a capital expense or capital asset replacement reserve, and a trustee election reserve, and a partial tax election reserve, et cetera. Do you still, take the reserves and kind of bundle them up that way, have different categories that reserves are supposed to cover everything? And I just wasn't used to seeing it in this particular way, and I had a question about that.
No, we haven't really used that system in a few years, but we also haven't been able to do quite as many capital projects as we would have liked. We did the renovation, but it's been even a few years since we did that. So it's definitely possible, and it would be easy to do.
But right now, in our reserves right now, we don't have, I'm looking at $200,000 capital asset replacement reserve. We don't have anything like that in our reserves now, right?
No, I'm not currently allocating them that way.
Just to touch on that, I don't know if you guys already have a reserve policy in place. And if you do, I'm not sure if we have it.
We have the policy that dictates we have 6 months of operating expenses in our reserves, but there's no other policy for how the remaining funds are allocated. Okay.
So when you draw down that $161,000, you've done it in a way that preserves that 6 month operating number that we need,
Yes.
right?
We have, and I think that what you're not seeing that I don't think was on the PDF that was sent out is 6 months of expenses, not including the capital, because I know you would like to have a capital reserve in there as well. But 6 months of expenses would be 1.8 million. So even with that drawdown, we'll have a reserve excess of 1.5 million, which
Yeah.
we could take that 1.5 million and break it into capital and create some other buckets if you like as well.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. The first thing on my mind is that we know we have a reserve fund when we look at our board reports and so on, but I'm hard pressed to remember exactly seeing that number on a month-to-month basis unless it's coded some different way. And then the other thing is, I've been thinking about this for a while. It would be good to have, in my opinion, and I know the board has to talk about it, a capital fund or a capital reserve that we can set aside, because no matter how you slice it, whether we try to do some of these improvements on our own or whether we all go out and get some bond money, that money is going to have to get parked somewhere. And if it was in this capital fund, we would all know, we would see every meeting exactly how it's getting drawn down and so on. So to me, it was just a matter of sort of clearing the air a little bit with the board when we look at our packages every month.
Well, I mean, we can file our money any kind of way we want. Like we can put it in whatever piles we want, but it's not like we have restricted funds or unrestricted funds now. If we have a general obligation bond, that would be a restricted fund. So it would be handled totally differently, right, Cindy? Like we wouldn't just deposit it in our reserves.
Right. And I do think the reason why we just really looked at the reserves, the 6 months operating right now, is you're going to see the reason why in the projections. I'm not sure you have the luxury right now. You can go ahead and create a capital reserve, but as you're going to see as we look at projections that eventually, especially if you don't pass that, if you don't redo the parcel assessment, you won't even meet that 6 months operating. So talking about a capital, there's no point.
Right.
Right. And I'm with you. I mean, if we get bond money, we would have to park it in a special place, which would be a
Definitely.
different kind of fund. I wasn't so much asking for a capital reserve, capital expense reserve fund, is trying to understand more clearly exactly how the reserve is categorized. And you've answered the question. So thanks for that.
Sure. Good.
Well, I think this budget looks pretty good, you guys. I mean, it's so tough to know what next year is going to look like that I really appreciate like a conservative approach to the numbers, keeping our revenue numbers very flat and treating our expenses, in a pretty ginger way. I think that's a smart way to do it. And, I hope we end up certainly exceeding some of those revenue goals. That would be great, but I think it's wise not to plan on that. Obviously, the one thing that I wanted to talk about, I guess, and maybe this is the moment, and maybe it's not, is obviously we're going to need to figure in our bond measure expenses into that consulting line item, and that's going to be a big giant chunk. So I don't know if we want to get into that now or come back to that, because obviously that's going to have to come out of reserves, because I don't see a lot of room in other places where we could pull. I mean, all the other departments are pretty solid. I don't think we can pull out of, budgets other places.
Yeah, looking at the figures between the political consultants, the work that NBS needs to do, depending on whatever we decide to go with, either the bond or the CFD,
Yeah.
And what Columbia Capital needs to do, it's looking to be closer to $100,000.
Yeah, it's going to be substantial.
Yeah.
And we don't have an option. Like, we're going to have to pay that money, because we have to fix the main library and we have to find money to do it. My one question though is, with all of those expenses that are tied to the bond, do we build that into the bond, or do we just suck it up I guess we suck it up out of our budget, because if the bond doesn't pass, we are on the hook for it. If the bond does pass, can we recoup that money out of it, or are we just out of it?
Usually with a bond, you can finance the bond issuance costs that are paid to a lawyer or bond counsel or a financial advisor, but you can't recoup past costs.
Okay, so it's kind of like you can finance your closing costs, but
Yes.
everything before that is.
That's exactly it.
Okay, well, that's reasonable, you know.
Mhm.
Cindy, I got a question while we're on bonds, and that is when the bond is in place, there's lots and lots of reporting to do and guidelines to meet and everything else. Do facilities typically have to add employees to make that happen? I mean, is it take
No.
another? Okay,
We can even do that.
okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
not a problem. But you're
One
right,
other
there is
question.
reporting.
One other question I have too, and I'm just now exploring this, but there are these costs that are outlined in the two proposals that we have. And one of them actually talks about a feasibility study, but I'm a little pessimistic about this being successful in the near term, given all the things that are happening with tax increases that are looming everywhere. And I wonder if there's a lower cost for a feasibility study rather than the full blown thing. And I know that you can't answer that, but I think that's something that we should be asking the vendors that are offering services.
Well, I mean, I want to dive into the weeds on these proposals, but I don't know if we're going to do that right now or if we still need to talk about.
No, I was actually asking just in Cindy's experience if something like that was available.
You mean like a lesser of a feasibility study?
Yeah, on amount that you would spend that's less than the full package, you know, trying to determine the likelihood of a favorable vote.
What's the current, what are you getting quoted right now?
Well, one of them was about $45,000 and the other had some itemization I didn't do. They're both going to be in that range, I would think.
Okay. I've had one done a couple of years ago at one of my clients up here in the desert, and it was 25,000.
Okay.
But well, I should take that back. It was probably about 4 years ago. That's the only experience I've had with that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So yeah, I agree with Katie. I appreciate the work that you put into this, and it looks pretty solid to me with a couple of question marks on stuff that I know you're going to get back to us on. But good work. Thanks very much.
I would love to talk through some of these 10-year projections before we move on, because I think there's some really critical stuff in here that we need to get wrapped around. So if that's okay with you, Terry, I'd like to move to that next.
Oh, sure. That's the iceberg that sunk the Titanic.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so first, I'd just like to say thank you so much for including these 10-year projections. I was saying to Nikki the other day, I don't think I've ever seen a set of 10-year projections for the library before. And I realized when I saw them that was a huge problem. And so I'm thrilled that we have them now. Obviously, there are some, real issues we need to confront. So I wanted to just kind of get your guys's quick overview. I mean, I've got some specific questions and some sort of tactical, asks, but if you guys maybe want to talk briefly about what you see happening, the underlying assumptions you've made, that'd be great.
Sure, I can take it away.
Perfect.
So if we're looking at the revenues, sort of as we discussed in the just next year's budget, we're keeping them flat for the first 4 years and then doing like a small 2% increase. Hopefully property values start to pick up in a few years here after we see them, flat or decline a little bit over the next couple of years. And a very important thing to note is the special assessment. So in these 10-year projections, it really, we didn't take that away. We're really hoping that that does go through and it does get passed again. So these projections are heavily reliant on that extra, $850,000 a year that you would receive. And then, as far as the other revenues goes, very minor. You guys are very dependent on those property taxes and that special assessment. So that's the bulk of your revenue that we're seeing come in. And as far as expenses go, that I believe the salaries and wages is on a 2% increase each year. Sort of go with a COLA, if you would. And the benefits, other things related to that, taxes, increases in association with that. Other things like operating expenses is generally just, 2% inflation, things like that. And the same pretty much goes for the rest of these. And you have your capital expenditures down there, which, we don't really know what you have planned. I know you're talking about renovating the building. So we would want to build that in if that was a road we were going to go down. But other than that, generally just minor increases in the revenues and the expenses as well with inflation. And then down at the bottom, you see your cash flow analysis, given all these assumptions and these factors here. So you've got a good 5 years where you're staying over the reserves. And then in year 6, Terry, you see we drop underneath that 6 months operating reserve that we calculate. And then by year 10, you're out of cash in these particular 10-year projections with these certain assumptions we have here. So that's sort of the outlook that Cindy and I created with the scenario here.
So a couple of things. Obviously, that sucks.
Yes,
Just to
it
put
does.
it lightly, it does. And it's
But I am thrilled to know that information today, as opposed to, when we go out for a parcel tax at the same level. So one of the things
That's right.
I've been playing around with is, two questions that seem to me to be essential. One is, what is the rate at which we have to renew the parcel tax to ensure our continued viability? And I come up with something around 1 1/4, like 125% of basically where we are. And the other is, are there ways to diversify our revenue stream that we can think about critically? Because of course we're always going to be an entity that's largely dependent on property taxes, right? We're not a service provider. We're not a utility company. I mean, we could be if, Christopher builds out broadband for all of Altadena, but absent that, we are always going to be primarily reliant on property taxes, but to such a large degree that if there's any downturn in that, we have absolutely no cushion. And I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on either of those two, where we would need to be on a parcel tax renewal to put us in a comfortable position, and what we might think about in terms of revenue stream diversification.
Sure. And I would say your figure is probably good on that special assessment, but what Cindy and I had kind of already talked about with Nikki and Nicole is sort of probably counting on trying to cut back your expenses, as opposed to, you guys can go and try and go out and get more donations and grants, but I know that's hard, and that's not a for sure revenue source. And you can up the special assessment as much as you can, but that's not, that's not a sure thing either. So, Cindy, I'll let you take it away if you have any other ideas.
Well, I'd have to play around with the model to see, like, Ian, I don't know if you're in it, and to see if, I am. What if we raise that special assessment by 10%? But I would say that, I mean, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth here, but you do have a lot of staff that, as your older staff turns over, you'll get staff that are less expensive and will be under PEPRA. I mean, you have opportunities that we haven't factored into this. You have opportunities to have perhaps retirements of some very expensive older classic members. You have opportunities to look at your OPEB benefit and reassess whether or not you continue that. That's a substantial cost that I don't think young people entering in the workforce really consider that to be a benefit. They're not really looking and thinking about that at the time.
Cindy, can you talk a little bit more about that OPEB situation, please?
So, Ian, can you work offline for just a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. The OPEB is the Retiree Health. Well, Nicole, why don't you explain what it covers? It's $500 a month when they retire, correct?
Yeah, 500
and-
towards their health insurance every single month for the rest of their life.
And
That's insane. Even people on Medicare?
Yeah.
so if I can give you some perspective though, and you only have to work for the district for 5 years to get it.
That's bonkers.
So
Like,
I
I
would
think
like-
it's great. Like, that's amazing if we had infinite money, but wow.
Yeah. I do have many special districts that offer it, but it's a financial loser. I've worked the numbers of keeping an employee for 5 years and paying them, you know, their medical for the rest of their life. And God forbid they live till they're 85 and they retire at 55. That 5 years costs you a lot of money. So I had to do this analysis for another client where I just said they absolutely didn't want to get rid of it. And they pay 100% benefits for employee and spouse for medical, dental, vision when they retire, 5-year retirement. So they said, we don't want to get rid of the benefits. So I showed them how much a 5-year employee, because they are in the position right now with a 5-year employee who's retiring, how much that position cost them. And they changed their mind. And they said, okay, well, we'll change it to a 20-year vesting schedule. So each year you get 5% more vested in that benefit. So they did that, and they did a couple other things, but it still is a loser. I mean, it's on your balance sheet as an unfunded liability, except to the extent you're putting money in a trust. But the way I look at it is you have 2 unfunded expenses. You've got your unfunded OPEB expenses, and then you have your unfunded PERS expenses. There's nothing you can do about PERS. That cost is going to be there. You can do something about the OPEB.
Well, and I would also much rather pay people more money now, you know, than and pay people more what they're worth than finance, you know, somebody's retirement cost decades in the future. It just doesn't.
I would tend to agree, except for some agencies are saying, hey, I'll take the gamble that there will be free healthcare for all and we won't end up owing anything.
Well, I mean, who knows, right? Like,
Right.
I don't know, but I do think that.
It's a dangerous game.
Yeah, well, sure. And I think that, like, I mean, I've worked in higher education where you have to stay for a long time to be vested in benefits. And I see the value in that and the retention, you know,
Yep.
the retention upside. But even for large universities with big endowments, that's a financial challenge. And as a small special district, I wonder about, like, putting all our chips in that basket. It seems to me that if it's something that we can, you know, obviously honor our commitments to people who have been in that system already, but going forward, I would love to be able to eliminate that expense and pay people more upfront.
It's unusual for an agency that's highly dependent on property taxes to have an OPEB. I was surprised when I saw that the library had it.
Yeah.
My other agencies that get 100% property tax don't have one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think however you slice it, you really need to manage your labor line, especially now. At least we've got a head start on this. We've got a forecast that shows us we need to start thinking about it now. So even the smallest things, Nikki, the study that we have about how, you know, rates should be raised and this and that, we're really going to have to look at that stuff harder because it doesn't come in one fell swoop. You have to do it just a little bit at a time, figure out where you can make the cuts, and it adds up over time, especially the employees that have been there a long time.
Mhm.
So Ian, were you able to work with the model and see what would happen if we changed?
Yeah, I've got it worked out. Nikki, it looked like you were about to say something.
No,
Oh,
I
I'm
was
sorry.
the only thing I was gonna say, I was muted, was that, like, we're already looking at the fact that we have 2 vacancies and not filling those, and really thinking about how we're going to recruit moving forward, you know, because, like,
Yeah, and to that
Yeah, if
Go
you want
ahead.
to bring up your spreadsheet, you can show.
Okay. Yeah, and I was just gonna say to that, this is a budget. And if you guys can actually perform better than that and, make those cuts throughout the year, then all the better. And then next year will look a little bit better as well.
And I
Okay,
would
so
add
yeah.
that I'm always very leery of sharing these 10-year projections, and because it's a guess, right? First off, it's a guess. But in
Mhm.
your case, it was important because you're in danger of running out of cash. So it was important for you to see it.
Really important to know.
Yes.
And because of our requirement to have that 6-month reserve, I mean, we just can't, we have to be able to front our expenses for half the year. Like we can't operate
Sure.
without it.
Mhm.
Right.
Well,
you
yeah,
look
we,
at the situation that just happened with the coronavirus, it's
Yeah.
anything can happen.
we could run a library or a couple of them based on the revenue stream that we see in front of us, but we couldn't do it the way we wanted to and the way that supported all the employees we have. So I mean, it
That's
can
right.
be done. That's not a problem,
Mhm.
but
That's
it'll
right.
diminish our services for sure.
That's right. Mhm.
Okay, so Katie, you said about $1.25 million, right? If you were to get that special assessment renewed.
Oh
that,
yeah, I just kicked it up by, I added 25%, right? So
that was a decent guess. So if you look at 24, 25 here, you'll see the revenue spike in that special assessment. Let me know if you guys need me to make this bigger, by the way. But so looking at your cash, you're good until year 10, then you fall under the reserve and you don't run out of cash.
Right.
So,
That's great.
and yeah, that's great, but you're really banking on that special assessment there.
yeah.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's a good case. That's a good scenario if you can make that happen.
Well, and I think that's where, I'm sorry to jump around a little bit, but, I think when we're looking at getting some polling on something like a general obligation bond, it would be wise to try to do a little bit of forecasting on parcel tax renewal, because that's going to be material to our success here. And
Mhm.
if that difference is, and I played with these numbers because I don't have the actual figure, but if the difference is, $40 extra per parcel, is that something taxpayers will be comfortable with? I don't know, but I'd like to know now as opposed to 3 years from now when we're trying to, go out for that, because I want to be making decisions that are in line with that trajectory now and not waiting until 2023 to do that.
And there's some facts out there that kind of bolster that. The parcel tax, there was about 150 library districts that put a Measure A type thing on the ballot back in 2014. And out of all those, the Altadena Library District had the highest voter approval for that in terms of percentage points, 85% out of 150. So we've got the wind to our back on that a little bit. I think the community would turn out again for that. But when you look at measures that we're trying to raise money for capital things like a bond and so on, the approval rate was 15 points lower than that. A lot of them passed, but the approval rate was a lot lower. So it demonstrated an adversity toward funding for capital projects, but operating projects to preserve services were much more popular. So there's little factoids like that all over that could color the way that we want to approach this. I think that idea that you talked about, Katie, of having a higher parcel tax for the operating Measure A thing that we have might be a better way to go. And it'd be really interesting to see if we could somehow move that up. I'm not sure if that's possible, but it would be interesting to try.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could do it whenever we want. Like it sunsets in 2024, but there's no rule that says we have to wait until then to renew it. We could renew it sooner.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was a factor or not. So I'm glad you're clarifying that.
Right, that's my understanding. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to
Okay.
make definitive statements. But that was the understanding that I had. I think, I mean, even if we moved it up and did it sooner, we still are going to have to finance the capital projects in front of us some kind of way. And there's no way around that. Like we are liable, we are in breach of ADA every single day that the main library is open. So we don't have a choice, but I do think if we can figure out between a bond or, whatever it is, and the parcel tax, what this sweet spot is for the two of those happening in relatively close proximity to one another, both in terms of timing and in terms of dollar amount, and like where our pain point is with voters, whether that's $20, $40, $120, I don't know, right? But where people are willing to settle and what feels comfortable to them, I think we can make, some better projections, because we do have some, some pretty substantial support. And I think if we play our cards right and we can demonstrate, that we're doing what we say we're going to do, and, the money's going where it's supposed to go and everything's happening in a timely way, I don't think we'll have huge opposition. The question is just going to be, do people have that, comfort level in their personal budgets with the way the economy is going to go in the next couple of years? And I don't think we know that.
Well, in this forecast, this, places that capital question at the absolute top of our list as a board to try to figure this out, where the money's going to come from.
Correct.
We're not going to get it by some magic appearance of all this grant money or something like that. That's just not going to happen.
It's not realistic. And I think also we have to, if we are going to look at the next 10 years, I mean, in these forecasts, even our materials budget stays, I mean, pretty flat. Like, it anticipates us not doing anything that remarkable. And I think that as a library system, we want to do some remarkable things. And so I would like to have room in our operational budget to do something interesting and take chances and try things, and not just, be kind of confined to the bare minimum. So whether that's a 25 or a 30 or a 35% increase, I don't know, but I'd like to have better intel on that.
Yep, me too.
I also have a question. I mean, does anybody know what other libraries might be doing to generate more revenue outside the traditional library services?
Well, I mean, certainly other libraries, have some library systems have more active foundations than we do, and
sure.
more experienced fundraisers.
I didn't think about that.
That are around ours. Our foundation is going through sort of a renaissance now and restructuring. So I think that's a big part of it. I think probably there are some libraries, and Nikki, you would know this much better than I would, but that do more that align with particular grants and granting agencies than we do, because of their populations or their particular service models.
Yeah, for example, in Las Vegas, they have a development department. So they're paying an executive basically to find grants. So obviously, if you're paying someone at that level, you're generating a lot more in terms of revenue. But again, that can ebb and flow. Obviously she's earning enough to make it worth, having her there and paying her to do that. But again, that's if there's grant opportunities available at that scale. I know with LA County, they're able to tap into some of the other department budgets depending on what the services that they're offering. Like, I do believe Sky Patrick talked about working with the public health department and got funding through them, millions of dollars, because of their work with like social services and mental health in terms of the way libraries offering service. But again, I've only seen it in the much bigger systems that they can get their hands on that. But I think at this point, it's foundational work in a lot of ways.
I think in the real world, though, it's that, most libraries are going to be a function of the city or the county government. And if they get into a tax crunch, I'm sure they go back to the library, division and say, you got to cut 25% out of your budget or whatever it is. It's a lot more probably brutal than that. And I think there's a lot of that that's going to happen with libraries now in the near future, in the next couple of years, because tax revenues are just going to plummet.
Oh, people are getting laid off all over the country. I mean, it's rough. It's really rough.
Yeah, I mean, we got to have that mentality. It's a siege mentality, and we don't quite feel it as much as the other libraries do perhaps right now, because we have our own source of funding, but we sort of have to act that way, I think.
I mean, I think the fact that we're not dependent on sales tax is like the best thing in the world right now.
Yeah.
I look at I think I heard that, I'm sure you guys have all seen what's going on in Santa Monica, but like just their library department, I think has to lay off almost 70 people.
Oh God, that's brutal.
Yeah. And every deputy level position with the whole city got eliminated.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's insane, but they're largely touristic, same way Las Vegas is,
Yeah.
So I think we're in better shape in many ways, but we have to look at this in the long term,
Yeah, I'm sure you saw that PUSD is dependent upon capital gains taxes, which have got to be the roughest of all because nobody's selling their stock or their house on to make money right now.
Ouch.
So it's just hitting everywhere.
Yeah. And I think also that we have, even in just the past 2 months, which have been bizarre, I think there's been a sense in the community, certainly, that the library has been agile and has pivoted and has provided services in the best way that it possibly can. And I know that that will continue, but I also think that it's going to be a difficult couple years to forecast effectively. And so I think a sort of strategy of, planning for a worst case scenario in terms of our revenue is smart, because worst case scenario, we end up, we're okay. Best case scenario, we've got money in our reserves and we can self-fund some capital projects. That's great, but I appreciate a small c conservative approach to anticipating some of these revenue numbers and where they're going to be, even though it's super depressing.
So Ian, is there any way that you could send us a spreadsheet with all of the Excel, we could populate it with our own numbers and play around with it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little complicated. I might have to walk you through it a bit, but yeah, it's a possibility.
It's no big deal, but I mean, I like the way that in real time you're adjusting this and that and kind of giving people a taste of what could happen if this occurs.
Mhm.
It's fun. I like it. I got to play with it a little bit, and I joked around with some of the assumptions, and it's helpful to see.
Oh yeah, you know what? I did send it to Nicole and Nikki, I believe, right? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'll forward it to you, Terry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, what else do we have?
Well, I think that's it for the formal aspect of the meeting. And what I will do, Katie, just so you know, is write up a report. I'm going to send that to Nikki. I can send it to you as well to add any last minute changes or additions that you'd like to put in there before we try to publish this to the board packet. And if I get on it right now with the broad, strokes of this and get it to you two to edit as needed, then I think we could probably get that done.
Okay, we need to talk about consulting.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like we're gonna include the 3 proposals from the political consultants in the board package for Monday, so that everybody can see them.
Okay.
Nicole and I will probably have a recommendation based on those 3 in terms of the completeness of the proposal and the finances, obviously. But I do think we should adjust the budget to include a higher number.
Yes. Yeah, I think so too.
I think so.
So if you give us that number, we'll adjust it and then send out version 3.
And
Yeah,
I mean, of course, that's keeping in mind, in my opinion, at least, that's why I want us to vote Monday to approve a political consultant that we hire. That'll give us 5 weeks until June, which is when we would have to, put in our letter of intent that we're going to move forward. And if we poll and we figure out that people aren't going to support it, then that money that we're allocating for the consultant and the whole bond proposal, we're not going to spend.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's going to be my recommendation. But do we budget the full 100,000?
I think we should. I think we absolutely should. Because if, quite honestly, we don't spend it on a bond, we need to spend that money either on development costs to figure out how we do some fundraising, because we got to solve our money problem on the capital front one way or the other.
Yeah.
So if we can't get it done through a bond, we got to figure out a plan B real quick.
Now, do you want, I mean, I think you already pointed it out, Katie, but do you want Nicole and I to look at other ways to cut in other places? Or is this just $100,000 that we're all agreeing is going to be drawn out of reserves? And of course, that's keeping in mind that we are underspent this year.
Yep.
Mhm.
I think, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where our budget versus actual comes in for this year. I think it'll be, you know, a little bit more optimistic than we're planning, which is great. But I think it has to come out of reserves because I don't see a lot of places in other departments where we can cut. I mean, I think you guys have done a pretty good job at trimming that down across the board. And anything structural, like changing the way we handle OPEB, like we can't probably get that, you know, figured out before we vote on the budget, right?
No.
Probably not that fast.
No, I mean, right, exactly. That's a structural thing that's going to take some time to unwind. So
So I
think-
guess, Nicole, going back to line 7155, which is consultants, what is the 30,000 we put in there for?
I did budget some money for political consulting, just not nearly enough. That's,
I guess we just want to up that number to 100, which would increase our budget by 70. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. And then we'd be pulling down 230 some odd from reserve.
I'll tell you what, I'm making the adjustments right now if you guys are agreeing on the number. So just to make sure I have that. You're looking at line 105 consultants other, right?
Mhm.
And that's going from 30 to what?
100.
100.
100, okay. Yeah, so the drawdown goes to 231,000.
Mhm.
Okay.
And just to confirm with the proposed budget, do we want to include the projections in the board package as well?
I think we should.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think it's critical that the board knows where we are and why we need to make some of these decisions. And I would like for people in the community, if they're playing along at home, to know as well, because I think, you know, and that's with us taking a very, you know, pretty narrow approach to services. We run out of cash at the current rate. So
I'll include the projections as well as the assumptions. And do we want to leave it that we're, you know, assuming we'd stay at 1%, you know, with the parcel tax at the same rate, as well as that it'll go up, like the property taxes would come back to 2% fiscal year 24-25? Because that's what you guys have in front of you. I just want to make sure.
I think so. I wonder if for the board package, it would also be nice to include like a couple of the models. So like the graph that you guys have in the model is super helpful with the, you know, with your trend line and where it goes. Show it where it is flat. Because I think as a bar graph, it's a little bit easier to instantly look at and go, oh, that's when we're underwater. Versus if we, you know, we're able to dial up the parcel tax a small amount, a more, you know, substantial amount, what that would look like. If we could just include a couple of those models, I think that would be really helpful for people to visualize that data.
Is that something you could put together for us, Ian?
Yeah, definitely. I would just need to know which assumptions you guys would want to compare and change between the models.
Yeah, let me play around with it for a minute, and maybe Nikki, we can talk about it a little bit, but let's talk about that because I'm not totally sure.
Okay.
Well, one thing you should think about is how much you're going to bring down expenses too, by adjusting staff or allowing for some attrition and so on. There should be a line that has our costs or operating costs going down as well, that will, you know, counterbalance what's going on with the money. And that could be just one version of the model, but I think we all owe it to ourselves to take a look at what we can control versus just the money part of it.
Oh no, I totally agree.
So would that be something like a percentage of staff reduction? Is that what we're saying? Like a staff reduction of 10% and what that looks like? I mean,
well, you would know better than we do about when that becomes a very painful topic to start monkeying with. 10%.
Well, I mean, I think you could say X number of full-time or part-time positions, but maybe, I don't know, I guess Nicole, we could talk about that. Because like, based on the spreadsheet, we were able to play with it in terms of like, if let's say you reduced, like just the 2 open positions we have, for example, you eliminate that from your spreadsheet and you could see the savings long-term as well.
Well, and I'm even just playing around with what happens if we change our OPEB, you know, like what are the things that we could do that would make it, that's why I'm saying like, it might be worth like playing around with it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I'm just saying you should probably have both of those in there, and it might be a wholly separate model than another technique you're using, but showing the board what could happen by reducing costs would be a good thing to do as well. And then just like you said, Nikki, just chatting it up a little bit, not in an onerous way, but one that lets people know, hey, we got maybe some hard times coming, as people would expect. And we're going to be asking people to do more with less perhaps in the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
I would just caution sharing the projections in a very public way, because it could come to backfire on you to some extent. I get that the whole board needs to understand this issue. But if something becomes contentious, here's what I've seen happen before when we shared just 2 years projections with one of my LAFCO clients. The commissioners really glommed onto what numbers we presented in the prior year. And then when they changed, they were blown away. Like, how can this number be different? You told us this expense would be this. I can't really tell what's going to happen 3 years from now. That's, you know, things change and this is just a guess. So I would caution, or maybe we put some really strong language on it that this is actual results will vary, or, you know.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, definitely reminding people that this is a projection with a capital P and not a crystal ball is,
Yes.
and I think that's where having multiple models is helpful, because it shows people where you can kind of turn the dials a little bit and how much variability there is. I am almost always in favor of more transparency and getting things out more broadly, because I think if we're going to have, you know, multiple campaigns to ask people for money, it's the only right thing to do is to tell them why as soon as we possibly can. But I totally hear you, and I agree that having some good disclaimer language on there is very helpful.
But you're right about that, Cindy, for sure. I mean, I could easily see how something like this getting out would be that the library is closing next week on social media.
Exactly.
That's exactly what will happen.
Yeah. When is your board meeting?
It's on Monday.
Monday.
Okay. If you have a couple of scenarios you need to see, we'll need to get them now. We're under a major time crunch this week. So we'd want to get that to you and make sure we have this in a format that's good. I'm ready to go.
Well, I mean, Nikki, what do you think? Do you think it makes sense to try to do this in terms of talking about projection stuff this month, or do you want to wait for next month and give it a little bit more breathing room? Because I'm wondering if maybe it would make more sense to divorce the 10-year assumptions and the preliminary budget,
Right.
a little bit, you know.
Well, it's not like the proposed budget is dependent on that.
It's not, and it may cause more confusion. And I do want to make sure that we have time to prepare models that are accurate and helpful.
Me too.
And you
so,
really want to analyze what you want to do with those models too.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So maybe for the modeling, we wait until June.
It could be June or July.
July, like nothing's gonna happen before then anyway.
That's true.
Because
So
in June, we're presenting the final budget. So again, would it be muddling that by?
Yes.
Let's just see what happens.
yeah,
But I do think it's important as we make decisions moving forward. And if you think about it, by June, we're going to have a better sense of what the bond's going to look like too.
Correct.
you know?
Correct.
So I agree. So how about we
Mhm.
won't include projections? We'll just do the proposed budget for Monday. And then maybe, we'll connect in another meeting at some point.
We could have another budget committee meeting in, June or July or whatever and talk about, or, we may decide at the May meeting that it's more appropriate to put together a separate committee to handle, bond or parcel tax stuff. I don't know. We had talked about that a little bit over email.
Yeah. Whether we want to be a finance committee as well, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd like the whole board to weigh in on that and
I would too. Yeah.
get their feel on it. So, but either way, I think waiting on that a little bit is probably good, because I think all of us would benefit from having more information in hand than we have today.
Yeah.
Plus the whole world itself is going to change anyway between
That's
now and
true.
a couple of months.
Sure is.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
true.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, so we'll connect with you two, Cindy and Ian, about that.
Okay, sure. That sounds good.
Okay.
And just a quick note, I don't think I have you guys on my calendar for Monday, but did you want myself or Cindy on that, attending the board meeting?
Katie and
I think
Carrie, do you think?
Good. I think we're just doing the proposed budget. I feel like Nicole can more than answer any questions that will arise. I think we should be okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this was super helpful today. I feel like we drilled down on everything that was a potential issue.
I think so.
Yeah, I think we're in real good shape.
So just for purposes of reporting, for the board packet, we're not going to include the 10-year forecast, right? We're just going to take the budget that we've done with the changes we've discussed and present that to the board and start to tease out this whole idea of the 10-year projection and so on, and present that at another board meeting, right, Katie?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, they're public materials. They're on the website for this
Right.
meeting, so they're around. I think, I don't know that we necessarily need to include them because we're not drawing any conclusions at this point in the board package. I think we can say, the budget committee got some preliminary projections and some preliminary modeling for what the next 10 years might look like based on various, fluctuations in revenue and expenses. And that's going to be an ongoing conversation over the next couple of months. And we look forward to reporting on that later.
Okay,
You
good.
may be
Yeah.
saying doing further analysis.
Yeah. Like there's just more work that needs to be done on that front. And I think until we have something, some more firm recommendations, I think it doesn't make a ton of sense to give people information if there's no action or decision-making to take at this time. It'll just cause anxiety.
Okay, yeah, I
And
agree.
I'd like to have better, better scenarios that are more specific. I think that would ground it more in reality for people.
Yeah, we've got a lot to digest right now, so I might as well just sit on it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we're in good shape for the proposed budget. Everything looks good there, so
Okay, good.
great.
All right, so is the meeting adjourned?
You tell us, boss, what are we doing?
Do we need a vote, Katie, you and I? to adjourn the meeting?
Sure, let's vote.
Okay, so we'll adjourn this meeting at 3:31, and I'll put all that stuff in the report that I sent to you two, Nikki and Katie, and I'll let you take it from there, okay?
Okay.
All
Okay,
right, thanks, Cindy and Ian. And you too,
Thanks.
Nicole, thanks very much.
Awesome.
really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Guys,
Bye.
stay safe.